All right, let's do this. Alexa, what's going on in today's video?
Today's video is part 1 of your guide to DIY decorative and auxiliary lighting. In this video we will get to listen to you mumble and stumble your way through the basics of project layout, how to power your LED system, and see a few examples of the many types of lights out on the market today. We will also get to watch some absolutely terrible camera work and listen to you say, a lot.
Well, thanks for that vote of confidence, hon. Hey guys, it's your buddy Rocky here. Today's video is going to focus on project layout and the different types of LED lights that you may want to use on your scooter. The scooter that we're going to be using as an example for this particular build is my Mercane Wide Wheel Pro. It's a nice mid-range scooter. I'm pretty happy with it. It accelerates fast. It's kind of visually distinctive. The steering is kind of a love it or hate it. I like it. The actual lights that I added onto it, it's a relatively simple build. If you look up at the top of the little cargo bag, you're going to see a little eagle eye surrounded by an angel eye, which is the loop. And then the chasing LEDs, those are actually LED strips. The model is WS2811, and we'll talk a little bit more about why those are great and how you hook them up later. Here's an example of what one of those fuses is going to look like. These are, you can buy them in packs of 10 off of eBay, and they'll cost you about $1 a piece. Fuse goes in there, solder a loop onto this end, goes on your battery terminal, and then solder this to your power wire. You're also going to need probably some RCA style connectors. Those are just for hooking up things that only require a hot and a ground. I'm sure you've seen these before. Maybe you just didn't know what they were called, but these are all RCA style connectors. This right here is a splitter in case you wanted to run multiple items off of a single power source. You don't necessarily have to buy these fabbed up like this. It's possible to just make them yourself. It's cheaper and it's not that much labor. You're obviously going to need some stranded hookup wire. If all you're doing is monochrome stuff, you're only going to need 2-strand wire. If you are using multicolored LEDs, you're going to need at least a 3-wire setup, and if you are using certain types, which we'll get into later, you'll need something that is 4 separate strands. You will also want the appropriate either 3 or 4 pin connectors, so you can solder those onto lengths of wire. The reason for that being is that you don't want to have all of your system just wired together as one piece. You want to be able to take the scooter apart and have the lights that are attached to that part of the scooter just come off, and to be able to unplug them from the rest of the system. Obviously, you are going to need some kind of a power source. Most of the LEDs that we're going to be talking about and using here all run on 12 volt, which is kind of the automotive standard. There are some LEDs that run at 5 volts, and there's a reason for that, and we can talk about that later. But most of what you're going to be using is 12 volt. Scooters operate at voltages that are obviously a lot higher than 12 volts, but a lot of them have a 12 volt circuit on their main board because they need to power their lights, and most scooters use the same 12 volt automotive lights that everybody else uses. I'm going to caution you about tapping into your scooter as a power source. Even though you may have a circuit that puts out the correct voltage, it may not be engineered to handle the additional current draw, and you can sometimes fry something or just have the scooter behaving in very odd ways. And so unless you have contacted the manufacturer or you have considerable electrical engineering knowledge, I would just recommend that you use one of these little rechargeable battery packs. These guys, depending on the features and the capacity, they can be had for 20 to 30 bucks on Amazon.com. They've just got a little RCA style jack in there that you actually you use that to plug it in and power it, and then you use it as the power out as well. Obviously, everybody's needs and everybody's scooters are going to be different, but one thing that I found that works very well is you can always use a cargo bag, and it's a good place to house all of your electronics, like the battery pack and the control unit for your LEDs and anything else that you need to make the system work. Most scooters, there's not a lot of extra room underneath the case or in the frame, and so you're going to be a little bit hard pressed to mount anything internally. I'm sure there are exceptions to this rule, but I haven't seen the inside of every single scooter, so I can't give you any advice about the specifics on that. Before you get started, you also want to come up with sort of a design layout. Figure out what it is that you want to do, and it helps me to sometimes sketch it out. That also gives me a place to record measurements. When you are figuring out what your cable lengths need to be, give yourself a little bit of extra length, because it's not always going to be a straight shot. You're always going to have to curve around something. You always need a little bit of slack in the cable. So err on the side of a little bit of extra length, and you can always trim it down to fit later. As I mentioned, this is really a pretty simple build. I mean, you're looking at a total of 5 separate LED strips, the eagle eye and the angel eye, and that's everything. Now, I had some other ideas and things that I wanted to try on this, and for whatever reason, either they weren't going to work or I just liked this better, but here's a couple of examples. The eagle's eyes are really cool and a fairly versatile piece of equipment. As you can see, it has a threaded back and a nut on it. And so sometimes it's actually possible to replace a bolt with one of these things and just wind up with a light right where the bolt used to be. It's kind of a cool effect. I've used these on a friend's clear Lexan motorcycle windshield. We just replaced some of the bolts and drilled the holes out a little bit bigger, put them in there. So now his windshield has a bunch of little accent lighting on them. You can get these guys in a bunch of different colors and a couple of different sizes. Generally, they are either 18 millimeters or 23 millimeters. Something that I had wanted to do on this scooter is I thought it would be neat to put a eagle eye at the end of each handlebar. Unfortunately, in my case, these handlebars fold up, and so there's no way to really route the cable back to the power source without having it hang out and just look visually unappealing, and so I had to forego that. I elected to go with the Decepticon symbol as my hood ornament, I suppose you could call it, but there's a lot of other things that I could have done there. For example, they make these big spotlights that are, there's no depth to them, they're very flat, so I could have mounted it just like I mounted that Decepticon symbol. I'd also considered, instead of just the regular eagle eye, going with this, which is similar in function. It's a little bit more powerful, but if you look at it, it's got some depth to it, and I just didn't want to take a hole saw and cut a hole that big into my bag to get it to mount flush. With the little eagle eye, you just drill a little hole, slip the bolt through, and you're golden. If you're worried about being visible in traffic, or you just like triggering seizures in epileptics, you can get one of these little strobe lights. I believe that this particular guy, I think I paid about $3 for that on AliExpress. So they're not that expensive. So this is obviously just a teeny tiny proportion of all of the options that are out there for you. And poke around on eBay, poke around on AliExpress, just find something that you like. And so this is a rather crude mock-up, but I recommend that once you've figured out what you're going to do, you've got your project planned out, that you go ahead, cut all your wires to length, do all the fabrication you need, attach whatever plugs you need, and then before you put anything onto the scooter, just hook everything together, completely external of the scooter, and just make sure it all works, because you don't want to get it on there, find out that something's not working, and having to troubleshoot it while it is still on your scooter. So, you know, what we've got, start with the battery pack. You've got an RCA style connector coming off of that. Usually they're going to go male to female. This you're going to need a double male, and then you're going to take that male end and plug it into some kind of a splitter. such as this, and then to your individual components, you'll be able to run power to those. So I have power going to the control box for the individually addressable LED lights, and then I have power going to the monochromatic single light in this case, because it's just an example. But that is basically what your wiring is going to look like, other than connecting the wiring from your control box to your LED strips. I'll get into soldering a little bit later, but that's your basic layout right there. As far as routing all of your cables, you're going to want to be kind of familiar with how your scooter is put together and where the access points are. The nice thing about scooters and motorcycles is they have to have cables going almost everywhere on them anyway, so it's easy for you to just kind of piggyback along those pathways, and so you're not having to drill new holes in the frame or anything to run cables through the interior of it. Something that I've found that is helpful if you don't have like a fishing tape, just an old wire hanger to sort of fish lines through cramped places. Just make sure that when you loop the end off that you use to hold the wire as you're pushing it through, just make sure there aren't any sharp edges that are going to cut any of the wiring that's already in there. And just as a common sense warning, motorcycles, scooters, and cars are some of the harshest environments for electronic equipment. You know, you've got heat, moisture, vibration, you know, all the kisses of death. So when you're routing your cables, just make sure that you're routing them in a way that they're not going to get pinched or that they're going to rub against anything, and that they are, if there's any waterproofing, that they're on the inside of that. So as far as attaching the LED strip lights to your scooter, generally they are attached with just adhesive tape. The strip lights, they come with an adhesive backing on them that generally works pretty well, but, and this is important, if you want your stuff to stick on there, clean the surface with rubbing alcohol, and then heat the actual adhesive up with like a little mini butane torch or a heat gun, or even a hairdryer would work in a pinch. But you just want to get it warm, and so if you attach it to that freshly cleaned surface and it's nice and warm, when you attach it, it'll stick on there real well. Otherwise, it's going to come flopping off like there was never any tape there in the first place. Generally, the adhesive that comes on the back of most strip lights, it's pretty good, but if you ever have to reposition them, then it loses a lot of its tackiness. It's never a bad idea to have an extra roll of double-sided acrylic tape handy. You'll want stuff that is 10 millimeters or 1 centimeter wide, because that will match the width of your strips here. And that's what they look like with the backing for the adhesive on there. So first time you put them on there, you're fine, but if you ever have to reposition them, you're going to need to bring your own tape. The other thing about as far as how you can route these guys, they don't turn left and right very well. Okay, it's hard to get them to curve to the right, but up and down, I mean, you can take those things around a 90-degree corner, you know, if you pay attention to where the actual LED chips are, and as long as you've cleaned the surface and heated up, you know, it'll stick right all the way around that corner pretty well. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out what you want to do. Before I wrap things up, I wanted to throw out a quick disclaimer out there. You know, your old buddy Rock would never steer you wrong on purpose, but I am kind of an idiot, so it's entirely possible that I've left something out or that I've given you bad information. And so it's never a bad idea to double check me, just to be safe. I just don't want anybody frying their scooter just because I'm an idiot.